We continue now with some additional examples of solving equations by factoring. Here we have the equation x squared equals 36. For our factoring method to work, we must be able to use our zero factor property. For our zero factor property, our equation must be equal to 0. So if we have an equation like this one that starts off it's not equal to 0, the first thing we're going to want to do is get our equation equal to 0. So in other words, use our operations for solving an equation. It allows us to add and subtract things to both sides. If we had any, we could combine like terms so that we get something nice and simplified that we can then begin to try and factor. So we need to get equal to 0 and then kind of simplify things if anything would combine. Once we have it equal to 0, we begin to solve by factoring. So your assignment now, pause the video and factor this thing. So hopefully you spotted that this is a difference of squares, so we can factor it as x plus 6 and x minus 6. X plus 6 and x minus 6. Alright. Once we have it factored, we use our zero factor property that says the only way this can be 0 is if one of those two factors is in fact equal to 0. So we take and set our factors equal to 0 now. And then solve each of those two equations. Here we have the equation x plus 6. So we subtract 6 from both sides. We get x equals negative 6. We have x minus 6 equals 0. Add 6 to both sides. We get x equals 6. So we get our solutions. X equals a negative 6 and x is equal to 6. So that's our first example here of solving by factoring in this video. Okay, so moving on now to example 2. Upon first glance, example 2 seems overwhelmingly complicated. And it is more complicated than some of the ones we've had before. Here it's actually factored. But unfortunately, it's not equal to 0. So that means our first step is we're going to try to simplify stuff and get it equal to 0. Well, my advice would be go ahead and take care of that multiplication first. And again, I recommend as you're doing these to try to pause the videos so that you can try and practice, and then you have the video to fall back on if you're stuck. So as we multiply out, x and x would be x squared. X and 9 would be minus 9x. 4 and x would be plus 4x. And then 4 and 9 would be minus 36. And that's equal to 4x. Before I worry about trying to get something on from one side to the other, usually we like to have each side simplified. So on the left hand side here I have this minus 9x and plus 4x that I can put together. Give me the equation x squared minus 5x minus 36, and then that's equal to 4x. Okay. At this point, I've simplified each side, so now I decide I want to get each side. I want to get the one side equal to 0. Typically, you look for the easiest one, and I also typically look to try to keep things on the side so that my squared term's positive. So I want to get rid of that 4x then. So I subtract it from the right hand side. I have to also subtract it from the left hand side. Okay. That gives me the equation x squared minus 9x minus 36 equals 0. Okay, so my equation now is equal to 0. At this point, I can begin to try and factor the equation. Okay. To factor the equation here, I recognize that I have a 3-term polynomial. I don't have anything in front of the x squared, so I say yay. That means I can do it the quicker way. So remember, we need to look for things that multiply to be negative 36 and add to be negative 9. Again, recommend pause the video and try this example on your own. Okay, so hopefully you came up with the things that multiply to be negative 36 and add to be negative 9 are a negative 12 and a positive 3. So we can factor that as x minus 12 and x plus 3. Okay, and that's equal to 0. And now once we again have it factored, we can make use of our zero factor property. It says, okay, when you have a multiplication problem equal to 0, the only way that can be equal to 0 is if one of the pieces is equal to 0. So that leaves me with x minus 12 equals 0 and x plus 3 equals 0. From x minus 12 equals 0, I can solve by adding 12 to both sides. Get x equals 12. X plus 3 equals 0. I can solve by subtracting a 3 from both sides. And so I get my two solutions, x equals 12 and x equals negative 3. Okay, until next time.